She has to live separately. I don't want to tolerate her in our house. Choose mom or me, my pregnant daughter-in-law shouted while I was packing my things in the next room. My son was silent. Sometimes silence kills more than a gun. But she sold her house for us. She has nowhere to go, my son finally exclaimed. There are hotels. She can stay there. I am annoyed by her presence. You want me to lose my child because of her? My son came into my room and didn't even look me in the eye. He put $200 on the bed and said, "You should have enough for the first time." Mom, Charlotte wants you to leave right now. Should I take you to a hotel? I looked at him, then at her. She stood in the doorway in a short silk dressing gown. She wanted to see him kick me out of the house I had helped them buy 3 months earlier. I want you out of our lives forever, she hissed. And I reproached myself again for introducing her to my son. The immigrant turned out to be not who she claimed to be. I didn't say a word to them. After that night, I disappeared for 3 years. Let me back up. I'm in a 60 years old, American as cornbread and stubbornness, a cashier who learned to count change and measure people in the same instant. I raised my boy, Johnny, alone. His father, Stuart, showed up like weather blowing in with a bouquet and an apology, then cheating his way out the door 7 more times. I never let him back for good. I believed, and still do, cheat once, you'll make it a hobby. I kept our little ranch house, painted it every spring, and left the porch light on for a kid who deserved better than the adults around him. Johnny grew up quiet and watchful, one of those boys who didn't ask for seconds at supper unless you insisted twice. I worried he'd be lonely, the kind of man who keeps his head down at work, eats frozen dinners, and calls his mother on Sundays because nobody else remembers. When he turned 34 and I saw him buying discounted birthday cupcakes for himself, I knew I had to meddle. Her name was Charlotte. We worked the same evening shift at the supermarket, me on the register, her stocking the cosmetics aisle like she was glossing the world with cherry bomb. She laughed at my jokes. She asked after my back. She knew where to find the blue tissue paper without asking. Kind, sensitive, soft voice, that was the costume. Under it, steel wire and a mirror tilted just right so she only saw herself. I brought Johnny to our break room by accident. He'd come to drop me at work the day his alternator died, and Charlotte offered us coffee from her little French press, which should have been my first clue. People who drag a French press to a supermarket shift either have flair or a plan. Johnny fell hard, and I, poor fool, felt relief unbutton in my chest, like a tight dress after a church potluck. I told myself fate had finally tucked my son under a good wing. I drained my savings like a bathtub wedding, honeymoon, the kind of flower wall that makes strangers stop and take pictures. I boiled chickens for broth and polished jars for centerpieces. I hemmed tulle in the midnight hours and smiled until my cheeks shook. We kept it intimate, just family and friends. Charlotte wore lace and gratitude. People cried. I did the ugly kind, the kind that blots your lipstick and names it joy. They moved in with me while they saved. Charlotte stood in my kitchen like she was auditioning for a cooking show and told me I seasoned well for someone your age. At first, she called me Mama Anna, then just Anna, then her. She made suggestions about the decor. Perhaps my framed photos of Johnny's Little League years might be archived. She bought a diffuser that puffed mysterious fog and a rug that couldn't handle shoes. Somewhere between week 3 and week 7, she asked my son, my shy, decent boy, why we should be stuck in a house that smelled like casserole. Sunlight can bleach anything, fabric, bones, resolve. I stood in my backyard, looked at the porch where Johnny had once slept with a fever while I timed his breaths, and said yes to selling the house because my son's happiness wore Charlotte's smile like a medal. Mom, Johnny promised, we'll get a modern apartment. You'll retire. You can help with the baby. Charlotte's hand lay flat on her stomach like a claim. We sold quickly. I watched strangers look into the closets. I'd scrubbed in grief and triumph, watched a couple measure the living room as if it couldn't possibly contain the fights we'd survived or the cake we'd eaten on the floor when the air conditioner died. The closing took an hour. Losing took all afternoon. The new place had elevators and quiet hallways that smelled like something expensive and unnamed. The kitchen was white as dental cotton. Charlotte labeled shelves, measured my dishes like they were threats, and invented a rule book that changed daily. You don't cook properly, she said the morning I made grits. You take up too much space, she told me when I left the vacuum in the hall closet. We'll turn your room into a dressing room, she added, sweet as citrus. You can move to the small office, babies need space. Johnny planted kisses on both our heads and begged us to get along. He worked late. Charlotte worked angles. It didn't take long for the escalation. Charlotte is a woman who loves ladders. She got a promotion at the store. And then, like a magician with a rabbit, she produced a crisis. A smartphone gone missing, me on the closing shift, and security footage conveniently edited to make my tired hands look sticky. I didn't steal. I never have. But Charlotte did what ambitious people do when reality doesn't serve them. She curated. The manager, 23 and terrified of conflict, called me into the office with a face like a funeral and asked for my badge. I walked out past the rack of birthday candles and the rack of regrets, head up, spine steady. When I came home empty-handed, Charlotte turned sympathetic. "It's so unfair," she crooned, "which is what you say when the thing that happened is exactly what you wanted. You can clean here for a while. I'll leave detailed notes so it's easier." Johnny looked relieved, kissed my cheek, and said, "Mom, it's temporary." I had been temporary since the lace dried on their wedding cake. I scrubbed baseboards until my knees barked like old dogs. I ironed curtains I didn't buy and washed plates I wasn't allowed to use. Dog bowls are cleaner than dishes after she washes them. I heard her whisper on the phone to someone who laughed like an empty jar. I told myself to endure until the baby came, until love softened edges. But some edges are serrated on purpose. Then came that last evening, the one I started with. Charlotte in silk, clutching her belly like a hostage situation. Johnny with $200 and no eye contact. Me, 60, homeless, a woman who had once survived a man named Stuart by buying sturdy shoes and refusing to cry where he could see. I left without a purse. Speech. I packed my old photographs, my work shoes, the scarf my mother knitted the winter she died. I spent the night at my sister Marina's, older than me by 3 years, born with a voice that could hush a courtroom or raise a barn. She brewed tea, made me eggs, and didn't say "I told you so," though she had. Stuart came by, she said when the cups went quiet. My ex-husband's name sounded like a warning siren and a lullaby. Months ago, when I was having my roof fixed, he left this. She slid a showbox across the table. On the lid, my name in his hand, still neat, still certain. Inside lay $2,000 in 20s, a letter, and a small brass key tied with red thread. My hands shook, and not just from rage. The letter smelled faintly of smoke and aftershave. "Anna," it began, "if you're reading this, something's wrong. I have been wrong about most things that mattered, but I wanted to be right once. The key is for a locker. Buy a ticket for the next flight to Barcelona. Start over. Really start. I don't expect forgiveness. I expect you to live." Stuart, the man who could never find the milk behind the pickles, had left me an international scavenger hunt. I should have laughed. Instead, I stared at the key until it blurred. A locker number scrawled on the back of the envelope, a 117, Estachi de Sants, Barcelona, Spain. The boy who had once sworn he'd take me dancing in Spain if he ever stopped screwing up had sent me proof of either redemption or madness. "Do you trust him?" Marina asked. "I don't have to," I said. "I trust me." I booked the ticket with the steadiness I reserve for pulling slivers and boiling sugar. Charlotte texted twice, first to ask if I could come back to make soup, second to demand the spare fob because the dog walker needs it. I turned off notifications. Johnny called. I let it ring. Sometimes love is a door you close so the house doesn't burn. At the airport, I became a woman I hadn't met yet. I bought a new lipstick at duty free, a red with a name like Victory or Vengeance, I forget which, but it looked like it could keep a secret. I watched the planes uncurl into the night and told myself stories about weather and wings. I didn't sleep on the flight. I planned. If the key was a joke, I'd come home with 2,000 less and one good story. If it wasn't, well, then I'd do what I always do. Work. But this time the work would be mine. Barcelona hit me like a perfume, orange zest, diesel, and something ancient. The taxi rolled through streets that looked like they were drawn by a hand that loved curves. Balconies bloomed with laundry and geraniums. The driver, a man with eyebrows that belonged on a saint, pointed out buildings that twisted toward sky like they were trying to remember a dream. Estachi de Sants was busy in the way of places that move lives around like chess pieces. I found the lockers by following the smell of metal and the sound of rolling suitcases. A 117 waited. My hands were steady, but my heart knocked like a rude neighbor. The key turned with a small, forgiving click. I opened the door to a darkness that felt heavy. Inside was a canvas bag, navy, scuffed, the kind a man buys when he intends to be practical and fails. It had a zipper pulled shut like a mouth trying not to laugh. Tucked on top, another note in Stuart's hand. For the years I wasn't there. For the years you were. I unzipped the bag, ready for disappointment. It smelled of leather and the faint cinnamon of old money. Bundles. Stacks of cash rubber banded in tidy mouths. I counted once, then again, and on the third time I stopped pretending numbers could lie. $120,000. I sat down on a cold bench and let strangers hurry by while I relearned my breathing. I thought of Charlotte's silk robe and Johnny's bent head. I thought of the locker door, the red thread, the way my sister had slid me the box like a communion. There was more. At the bottom of the bag, under the money, a folder embossed with something that made my vision tilt. Anna, not my name typed, my name engraved. Inside documents, notarized and official even in Spanish I barely remembered from a community college night class 30 years ago. Articles of incorporation, transfer papers, a logo, an elegant stiletto sketch, clean as a signature, and the words that made my mouth go dry. Frica de Calzado Ana owner, Ana L. Reyes, registered in Barcelona. Stuart, you beautiful, impossible hurricane. What had you done? A woman in a navy blazer stopped near me, scanning the space like she was hunting a lost dog. She had a clipboard and a kind of purposeful impatience that said she'd been waiting. Our eyes met. She looked at my bag, at the folder, then at my face, searching and certain. Señora Reyes? She asked, switching to careful English when she saw the confusion flicker. I am Marta. I was told to watch for you. We have a car. I stood, the money still warming the canvas like a secret bakery. A car? I repeated, because sometimes you need to hear the ridiculous thing out loud so you know you're awake. Marta's smile was quick and professional. And a factory. And people waiting. Your people. Mine. I tightened my grip on the bag and followed her, past the lockers and the train boards and the version of myself that would have turned back. We stepped into the bruised blue of evening. Barcelona breathed around me, impatient and generous. The car door opened. I slid in, holding my future like a carry-on. Before we go, I said, my voice steadying into something I recognized. Tell me one thing. Why is it named after me? Marta glanced at me in the rear view, eyes bright. Because the founder insisted. He said the only woman who ever made him want to be better deserved to walk on air. I laughed, then an unpretty, full-bodied laugh that belonged to the woman I'd been before Charlotte and after everything. Well, I said, let's see if I can make a pair of wings. The car turned toward a district of brick and light. Somewhere above the road, a billboard flashed with a silhouette of a heel so elegant it looked like it could slice through cloud. My heart kept terrible. Perfect time. I had been kicked out with $200 and a suitcase. I had opened a locker to find $120,000, a factory, and a name I could finally own. And I had a son and a silk-robed lesson walking around somewhere, thinking I would vanish like steam. Not me, not Anna. Drive, I told Marta. We have work to do. And as the car slipped into the city's bloodstream, I felt it, the first thread of something sharp and shining pulling taut in my hands. Vengeance? No, craft. A plan stitched clean. Because if there's one thing a good pair of shoes knows, it's how to carry a woman where she intends to go, and I had every intention of making sure the next footsteps Johnny and Charlotte heard were mine, echoing from very high places. Marta's Volvo hummed through streets that smelled of frying garlic and sea spray. Her English slipped in and out like a bilingual bookmark. Don Esteban was a complicated man, she told me as if narrating a novel she knew the ending to. He collected shoes like other men collect stamps. He had an eye. When he retired, he wanted something human. He wanted a name on the door. He liked your name. He liked your story. He met your husband once. She said it all casually, like one mentions the weather or the price of fish. My first laugh at that came out too loud, because of course he had met Stuart. Stuart met decorators in hardware stores, strangers in laundromats, and men with nice shoes in airports. He met the right people at the wrong times. Marta held my stare in her rearview mirror, professional and patient. You will see, she said. He was not sentimental, but no one trusted his judgment more than we did. The factory stood at the edge of a neighborhood where brick met better luck. It was the kind of place that smelled of glue and leather and promises the exact scent one might pin to a future. The sign above the door was clean, the stiletto sketch elegant and intimidating. Someone had already spray painted in across a steel slab in glossy letters that did not look vandalized but rather ceremonious. It made my knees feel like an audience. People filtered from the building like bees from a hive, carrying boxes and sketches, coffee cups, and a seriousness that only comes from knowing your hands make other people look good. Pilar greeted me like I was long awaited and long overdue, an older woman with hair caught in a practical bun and fingers stained a permanent tan from dyes and leather. Her handshake was strong, her smile spared. "You are Anna?" she asked, English clean with a Spanish lilt. "Yes." My voice surprised me. It had a sharpness I recognized as useful. "I guess I am." Pilar led me through workshops where men and women sat bent over lathes and lathes, where the music was the constant chatter of machines and the whisper of awls. I watched patterns unfold from paper like the skeletons of shoes, centuries of wisdom kept in chalk lines. There were racks of leather so soft they seemed to have been stroked by angels. There were molds shaped like feet that had traveled continents. Someone produced a portfolio, fabrics, sketches, a mood board the color of dusk. A young designer named Luis explained his vision with the bright hunger of someone whose life had lately been agreed upon by a group chat. "We are working on a capsule," he said, "classic with a modern heel. We want comfort, elegance, a woman who knows what she wants without needing to tell the world." He looked at me when he said it, as if I might hand him the last word on what a woman should be. They had already made things in my name. Boxes of polished samples sat in a corner as if waiting for a mayoral ribbon. The first shoe I was handed was not scandalous. It was simple, a pump with a curve like a sigh, leather the color of late October, and stitching that made my fingers itch to learn. I put it on. It fit like a promise. "It is the first," Pilar said, and I heard pride sharpen the edges of the word. "We tried to make something that would walk and not beg to be admired." I studied my reflection in a puddle of factory glass and saw an older woman with tight-lipped lines and eyes that had learned to be both soft and dangerous. For a moment, the past felt like a coat I had shrugged off. I thought of Johnny small and sticky with peanut butter at our kitchen table. I thought of Stuart given to apologies like confetti and named for the man who could not keep his hands off regrets. I thought of Charlotte and her silk robe with a collar sharp enough to cut. "Why me?" I asked Marta again, because questions are an addiction and sometimes the only way to exhale. She shrugged with a woman's economy. "Don Esteban had a file on you," she said. "Photos, letters. He told me once, before he died, that he wanted to name the company after a woman who knows how to walk. He said, the name must be honest. He never told us how he knew you. He told us some things he should not have known. He trusted Stuart once upon a time. He left the rest as a problem for people alive enough to take it." That line, "Stuart trusted," sat in me like a splinter. I felt bound and furious and oddly amused. Men like Stuart made mistakes like tumors recurring, invasive, and hard to explain without surgical detail. But here was an absurd altruistic gift left in a showbox key. I turned the leather over in my hands and thought about the way life sometimes hands you a taxi to a new country instead of a bandage for an old wound. The first week was a baptism of grit. Marta taught me how to sign invoices so my signature looked like a woman who had owned more than grocery store receipts. Pilar taught me how to tell the difference between cowhide and calf. Luis showed me how to sketch with my left hand. I'm right-handed. This fact will matter later, and how to cut negative space into something flattering. I learned words cabra, horma, plantilla like a new set of jewelry. The days were long and dense and so tactile I almost stopped remembering to miss my old house. I slipped into a rhythm of measurements and conversations, and slowly, the small, hungry attention I gave the work started to pay back in that particular currency that older women learn early: respect. The artisans who had been polishing shoes for decades, who measured feet the way some men measure time, stopped being merely staff and became my teachers in coalition. They laughed at my jokes. They corrected me. They let me fail at stretching leather and then showed me how to recover like a woman who had learned to make mistakes into craft. Business happened fast like weather. A Barcelona boutique with a reputation for finding women who wore their lives in their shoes asked for samples. A stylist visiting from Milan liked a heel and told a woman who knew other women. An editor from a magazine with a broad, velvet masthead took one look at the pump with the line like a sigh and asked for an interview. Each favor turned into a phone call that turned into an order that turned into a small tree of clients, each one bearing fruit that local shops could sell with a proud, confidential smile. I was careful. I did not spend like a woman who had been given a windfall and intended to drown in it. I paid staff fair wages and hired a legal consultant who made me sign things in Spanish until the words began to feel like armor. I invested in design classes for Luis and in an apprentice program so Pilar could teach the old stitches to young hands. I bought a modest apartment above a bakery and learned the sound of church bells at 6 in the morning and the way an espresso can reduce regret to something tasting quaint. But I also played. There were nights when I walked the Ramblas and let the city's light lean on me. I found a tiny table at a bar where they served oysters like a declaration, and a man at the next table would tell me about the sea as if it were something he used to know. I bought a scarf that has no business with my wardrobe but looked like a secret lover. I called Marina and told her about the leather and the way Marta blushed if I called her by her name, and we laughed until we cried because that is what sisters do when they are repairing a life. 3 months into the factory, I got a call that froze the room. It was from a number that had the look of someone who rings for business and expects a receptionist. Marta answered, her voice folding into professionalism. She handed me the phone like a baton. Anna, the voice said, American, clipped, a little displeased with itself. This is Claire from Harper and Vella. We're in New York, but we saw the sample in Milan. We want a line for next spring. We'd like to fly you to the show. I counted heartbeats. 1, 2, 3. The logical part of me cataloged expenses and shipping and the need to improve toe boxes for wider feet. The less logical part had fingers twitching like a child set loose in a shoe shop. Of course, I told Claire, which felt like the truth because it was mine. Tell me the dates. The rest of the day floated by in a bright blur. We called manufacturers, adjusted molds, drew sketches that looked like promises. Pilar and Luis worked until their wrists ached, and when they stopped, they came to my small office with plates of empanadas and ideas. A woman wants substance, Pilar told me. She wants comfort. She doesn't want to be seen as needing help. I nodded so hard my neck hurt. I had raised a son who was taught how to hold his emotions like a polite coat. Perhaps, I thought, women's shoes should teach the world how to meet a woman standing. Business grew like a plant. You water carefully. Orders arrived in drifts and then in gusts. We hired a small PR firm. We rebranded a little, keeping the simple pump but adding a line of flats that had a kind of dignity, sturdy, handsome souls for women who walked through airports or courthouses or the rooms where their ex-husbands might someday try to apologize. And then, one evening, there came a test I had not expected. An email popped onto my phone from a friend I had not yet made, a photographer in Barcelona who handled campaigns for a boutique in Madrid. He had seen our small feature in a magazine and suggested a portrait for a new billboard campaign. We want to tell a story of a woman who walked to her destiny, he wrote. We want to use a face that belongs to the shoes. A billboard. The idea lodged in me like the heel of a shoe in soft earth. My first thought was practical cost, scheduling, approval. My second thought was sharper. What would my son and Charlotte think if they saw my face the size of an apartment building? I did not know then if I wanted them to see or not. I did know I wanted them to feel something, conviction, perhaps, or the small shame that comes when the mistake of underestimating someone blooms in public. But I also felt a tug, something softer, at the idea of being large in a way that had nothing to do with needing anything from anyone. Pilar and Marta collected me to see the sample shoot. The photographer, a man named Andres with a beard that looked like a map, had a crew that moved like tide, purposeful, tidy, sure. He told me to wear what I wanted. I put on the debut pump and a suit that fit my shoulders like a good apology. Standing under lights that made my crow's feet human and not crimes, I felt, for the first time in a long while, like a woman carved out of her own choices. The image we made was not glamorous in a way that forgot work. It was glamour with a callus. My portrait, my face, the face that had watched my son learn to tie his shoes, the face that had taught herself to mortgage hope and pay for cake, the face that had packed a bag and flown to a city for reasons she could not yet explain, was captured in a way that said both, here is a woman who has been given a second hand, and here is what she did with it. We printed it. The billboard went up in a neighborhood where commuters caught trains and looked up to see something that refused to be small. I walked past it on a morning that smelled of rain and paint and felt the new thing, fame, recognition, press against my ribs like a warm envelope. That evening, when we closed the workshop, there was a small envelope on my desk. My name was written on it in a hand I knew well enough to hate and mock and keep Stuart's. My breath hitched like a hook. I had not told anyone at the factory anything about the showbox in Sant's station or the sister who had passed it to me with trembling hands. I had deliberately kept the past in a pocket I opened only when the world grew too loud. I opened the envelope. There were two pieces of paper, a photo of Johnny, younger, standing in front of our old porch with a blueberry stain on his cheek, and a plane ticket round trip, New York to Barcelona, dates that started tomorrow. No letter this time, just a ticket and the implicit permission for return. I held the photo against my heart and felt something like a bell tolling in the distance. An invitation, a provocation, a threat, and a promise all rolled into one. For the laboring woman who had been shoved out of her house with $200, the world had become ridiculous and generous. Tomorrow, Pilar asked gently when she noticed the ticket. For whom? I asked, though I already suspected. For the one with the soft hands and the silk robe, Pilar said. Her look was practical and human. Sometimes people come to see. Sometimes they want to apologize. Sometimes they want to buy. The city outside my window smelled of roasting chestnuts and possibility. I turned the ticket over in my hand and felt the weight of decisions waiting like well-shaped shoes. I had learned how to walk again. I had not yet learned how to run. I set the ticket on my desk and then reached for the phone. I did not call Johnny. I did not call Charlotte. I left the ticket where it was, between a stack of invoices and the blueprint for our spring line, and I walked out into the night. Because there are times when a woman must decide whether she will reenact old patterns or invent new endings. I had just found my hands could shape the latter. The envelope, the ticket, the billboard, they were all loud as church bells and twice as dangerous. I slept poorly that night, not out of fear, but because of a particular kind of excitement that feels like electricity under the skin. In the morning, Marta brought coffee and an idea. We will have a small presentation at the showroom, she said. An intimate circle of buyers, editors, and we can invite your family. They could see what you have done. The word invite floated like a moth around a lamp. For the woman who had been asked to choose between her child and a robe of silk, invite felt like something soft and sharp at once. Or, Pilar said, finishing Marta's sentence in a way that made me smile, we show them from the balcony. I laughed, then a sound like glass and thunder. The factory hummed its steady song. Outside, the billboard had already begun to glow in the dusk, the silhouette of that first pump, a dark promise against an even darker sky. Some invitations should be taken. Some should be declined with style. Some should be accepted as a means to teach a lesson so neat it fits on a shelf. I poured myself a cup of the thick Spanish coffee and stood by the window looking at the billboard, my face now haunted. There was a plain ticket on my desk with a name I loved stitched into the corner. I could go home and accept the small, soupy apologies with a slice of cake and a half-hearted hug. I could hit the return and pretend the past had been a strange dream rented for a season. Or I could take the seat of someone who had rebuilt herself in an unknown city and walk into whatever arrived with the same practical, polished shoes I had started to craft. I put the ticket in my bag, folded, not flattened, and I walked back into the workshop. Today, we would make the sample that might change everything. Tonight, someone in New York might clap politely. Tomorrow, a son and his silk-robed wife might step off a plane. And the day after that, who knew? The streets hummed with possibilities as we pinned leather to last and sewed edges that refused to fray. By the time the sun dipped low and the shop lights threw long shadows across our bench, we had a shoe that sang. It had a heel that bent like a bow and a sole that felt like the ground saying yes. I slipped it on and walked across the room. The sound it made was small and decisive, a neat, honest click. As I set the shoe down, my phone buzzed on the workbench. The name on the screen was one I had not expected, Johnny. I let it ring, and the buzz stopped. The choice didn't. The phone buzzed again. Same name, my son. I stared at the screen as if it were a snake coiled in glass. Marta glanced over, saw the name, and quickly looked away the way people do when they sense a private earthquake. I silenced the call. Then came a message. Mom, we're in Barcelona. Please call me. Well, I'll be damned, I thought. It took them 3 years to notice my absence, but only one billboard to rediscover their manners. Charlotte must have seen my face first. She was the kind of woman who couldn't stand anyone else occupying a spotlight. My lips twitched. I could almost hear her shrill little gasp echoing through some high-end boutique. Johnny, that's your mother. But I didn't call back. Not yet. Instead, I went upstairs to the small balcony of the factory's loft. From there, The city stretched wide and arrogant, full of secrets and sunlight. The billboard shone at the corner of Grand via a tall, defiant silhouette, and a woman who walks her own path. It was a line I'd written myself. Luis had fought me on it. It's too long, he said. Slogans must be quick. Then let them hurry to read it. I told him. I've spent enough years being shortchanged, and now here it was, glowing against the dusk, my name rising above the city like a second sunrise. I sipped my espresso and waited, because I knew they'd come. They did. 3 hours later, as I was reviewing sketches for our next collection, Marta poked her head through the office door. Ciora, she said softly, there are 2 people downstairs. They say they are family. Family. A word with the sweetness of honey and the sting of bees. Send them up, I said, and straightened my jacket. When they entered, I barely recognized my son. He looked older, thinner, and worn at the edges. Life had ironed out that boyish softness he once had. Charlotte followed, dressed in expensive linen, her pregnant glow replaced by the sour gleam of self-preservation. She had the same perfume, powdery, artificial, and somehow aggressive. Mom, Johnny breathed, as though the word itself might save him. It's really you. Charlotte's smile was tight. We saw your picture everywhere. We couldn't believe it. You're alive? I supplied, setting down my pen. Yes, still am. Barely missed by the tabloids, though I must thank you both. If you hadn't thrown me out, I might never have discovered that I own a factory. Charlotte flinched, and Johnny rubbed the back of his neck like a man who'd practiced apologies in the mirror. Mom, he started, voice cracking. I didn't want to, I know. I interrupted. You never want to, Johnny. You just do it. That's the difference between us. You let people make your choices. I make mine. He fell silent. Charlotte, ever the actress, pressed a hand dramatically to her chest. Anna, I was pregnant. I wasn't myself. You have to understand. I understand perfectly. I cut in. You wanted me gone. You got what you wanted. Now you find you don't like the consequences. Welcome to adulthood. I stood, walked to the window, and gestured toward the billboard. You see that? Every stitch of leather, every pair of heels, every ad, they're all my doing. Mine, not Stuart's, not Fate's, and certainly not yours. You two gave me the final push. Johnny's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment I saw my boy again, the one who used to run barefoot through the sprinklers, laughing at nothing. It cracked something in me, but cracks let light through, and I wasn't ready to patch this one yet. Charlotte stepped closer, eyes glinting. We just wanted to see you. Johnny thought what? I turned on her, voice sharp as a heel tip. That I'd open my arms, cry, and invite you to stay in my guest room? You forget, darling. I've already given up one house for your comfort. I'm fresh out. Her nostrils flared. We came all this way and I came all this way too, I said softly. Difference is, I built something when I arrived. Marta appeared in the doorway, sensing the storm. Shall I bring coffee? Yes, I said, still staring at Charlotte. 2 cups for our guests, and a tall glass of water for me. I like to watch people sweat. Charlotte turned crimson. Johnny looked at the floor. Marta vanished, lips twitching with suppressed amusement. When the coffee came, we sat. Johnny tried to speak again, but I raised a hand. Before you say anything, let's be honest. You didn't come to apologize. You came because you saw something you wanted. He blinked. No, Mom, don't lie, son. I spent 30 years reading faces from behind a supermarket counter. You can't fool me. You saw money, success, fame, and suddenly your mother is worth calling again. Charlotte reached for his hand, but I noticed her nails trembled. We didn't mean to hurt you, she murmured. We thought you'd find somewhere else. We didn't think. That's right, I said. You didn't think, but you both taught me something precious. Never to depend on anyone else's kindness. So let's skip the rehearsed guilt and move on to the real reason you're here. Charlotte hesitated. Johnny swallowed hard. We're in trouble, Mom. There it was, the confession beneath the courtesy. Charlotte spoke quickly, her words spilling like marbles. The store closed after the pandemic. We lost the apartment. The baby, I stiffened. The baby? She looked down. Our daughter, Lily, she's 2. We left her with my cousin in New Jersey. We came here to ask for help. A pause followed, heavy as wet sand. I could have gloated. I could have laughed. But instead, I thought of that small child, innocent, caught in the wreckage of her parents' greed. And I thought of myself, 60 years old, building something from ashes. I leaned back. You're asking for a job, not charity. Charlotte blinked. A job? Yes. You can both work here, but not as family, as employees. Earn your keep. Learn how real people live. Johnny, you'll start in the stockroom. Charlotte, you'll clean the offices. I believe you're familiar with domestic work. You once told me I wasn't very good at it. Her lips parted in horror. You can't be serious. Oh, I'm very serious, I said with a smile that could freeze lava. You want a second chance? You'll find it in the broom closet. Johnny looked torn, ashamed, desperate, yet oddly relieved. If that's what it takes, Mom, I'll do it. Charlotte turned on him. You can't be serious, Johnny. She's humiliating us. No, Charlotte, I said quietly. I'm teaching you. Consider it tuition. I paid mine in heartbreak. Marta reappeared, handing me a folder. These are the employee contracts, Ciara. She glanced at Charlotte and Johnny, one eyebrow arched. Would you like me to prepare to more? Yes, I said, starting tomorrow. Minimum wage, no privileges. Charlotte gasped. You're cruel. I smiled. No, dear, I'm thorough. That night, I sat alone in my apartment above the bakery, the smell of warm bread rising through the floorboards. I poured a glass of rioja and turned the old photo of Johnny over in my hands. On the back, in Stuart's messy scrawl, were the words, "Forgive me through him." Forgiveness, such a tender word. I had worn it once like a cheap perfume and found it didn't suit me. But maybe forgiveness wasn't a gift for others, it was an armor for yourself. I placed the photo on the windowsill beside a pair of prototype heels. Outside, the billboard shone brighter now that the city lights had dimmed. I raised my glass to it. To every woman who's ever been told she's in the way, I whispered. May we all find a factory with our name on it. Then I drank slowly, letting the wine taste like triumph and restraint. Tomorrow, my son and his wife would start their first day under my roof, not as family, but as workers. They would learn what it meant to earn, to sweat, to apologize with effort instead of words. And as I drifted to sleep, one last thought twinkled mischievously through my mind. If Charlotte thought my cooking was bad, she should wait till she sees my management style. Because this time, I wasn't just a mother, I was the boss, and I intended to teach them the art of walking not away, but forward. The next morning dawned bright and unapologetic, the kind of Barcelona morning that makes even pigeons look ambitious. I woke early, put on my soft leather flats, the kind that whisper authority instead of shouting it, and walked to the factory before the sun fully warmed the tiles. It was Monday, a new beginning, and for Johnny and Charlotte, a very different kind of honeymoon. I arrived early enough to watch Marta set the coffee pot to gurgling and the staff shuffle in, chattering in Spanish about the weekend. Pilar handed out tasks with her usual precision. When the clock struck 8, I heard the hesitant shuffle of two people trying to pretend they weren't terrified. There they were, my son and his wife, both dressed wrong for humility. Johnny wore slacks that had seen better paychecks, and Charlotte, well, she had on designer sunglasses at dawn and heels that were meant for catwalks, not cleaning floors. Good morning, I said brightly, as if greeting guests to a Sunday picnic instead of the first day of their redemption arc. You're on time. That's a promising start. Johnny nodded, eyes low. Morning, Mom. Charlotte mumbled something between a greeting and a groan. Marta, I said, gesturing toward my secretary, who'd been waiting with an expression halfway between pity and curiosity. Please show Mr. Reyes to the stockroom. He'll be helping Luis with shipments. And Mrs. Reyes. Charlotte straightened slightly, expecting something glamorous. You'll report to Pilar, I continued. She needs help cleaning the sewing floor and polishing the fittings. You'll find aprons in the supply closet. Try not to ruin them. Her mouth fell open. You're serious. Always, I replied. It's one of my flaws. Pilar gave me a respectful nod. She'd handled men with bigger egos and women with smaller hearts. Come, Ciara, she said to Charlotte. We'll start with the floors. They don't clean themselves, no matter what your perfume promises. Charlotte looked at me, her lips tight. I smiled sweetly. Welcome to the team, dear. As they disappeared into the bustle of the factory, Marta leaned in close. You really are something, Anna. Don't flatter me, I said. I'm just recycling pain into productivity. The day was a lesson in irony. From my office window, I could see the warehouse bay where Johnny worked, stacking boxes, taping labels, his once soft hands learning the language of labor. He didn't complain. He moved slowly but steadily, shoulders hunched, pride folded away like an old coat. Charlotte, on the other hand, lasted 12 minutes before her first meltdown. I heard her voice echo from the sewing floor, sharp, nasal, and dripping entitlement. Pilar later told me the scene in full detail, bless her soul. Apparently, Charlotte had refused to use the industrial mop, claiming it was unsanitary. Pilar, never one to tolerate nonsense, had simply handed her a bucket and said, "Then you use your hands." By noon, Charlotte was pale and sweating, her manicured fingers trembling around a damp cloth. The staff tried not to laugh, though I caught Pilar humming a tango under her breath. When the lunch bell rang, I walked through the factory floor like a general inspecting her troops. Johnny looked up, surprised to see me. His hair clung to his forehead. "I'm managing," he said before I even asked. "You'll find work easier than guilt," I told him. "It pays better." He nodded, lips pressed tight. "Mom," I held up a hand. "Save it. Words are cheap. Sweat's expensive. Keep investing." He gave me a small, almost grateful smile. Charlotte, meanwhile, sat at a table with her lunch untouched. Her once perfect nails were chipped, and she had a streak of polish across her blouse. "This is humiliating," she muttered as I approached. "No," I corrected gently. "It's honest. And honesty is something you've owed me for 3 years," she glared. "You're enjoying this." I leaned in close enough for her to smell the faint hint of leather on my clothes. "Not nearly as much as you enjoyed watching me leave my home with a suitcase." Her eyes flickered. "I didn't mean no. I think you did," I said softly. "You just didn't expect life to have such an excellent sense of irony." By the end of the week, I saw small changes. Johnny began to smile again, hesitant at first, then genuine. He shared sandwiches with the other workers, joked with Luis about soccer, and stayed late to help reorganize the stock shelves. I saw pieces of the boy I'd raised, the one who knew kindness wasn't weakness. Charlotte, however, learned slower. She complained about her back, her nails, the smell of glue, the noise of the machines. Pilar's patience was near holy, but I could tell she took quiet delight in assigning Charlotte the toughest tasks. "Every queen must learn to sweep her own throne," Pilar told me one afternoon, eyes twinkling. "Remind her of that hourly," I said. Still, something unexpected began to happen. The workers, most of whom had despised Charlotte on sight, started to soften. She was, after all, a spectacle. One afternoon, she fainted dramatically while polishing a display case, and Pilar caught her before she hit the floor. They gave her water, fanned her with fabric samples, and by the end of the day, the same women who had rolled their eyes at her were teaching her Spanish swear words. By the third week, I noticed Charlotte laughing with the cleaning crew during break. Not a mocking laugh, a real one, shaky but human. That night, when I locked the office, I found her still in the hallway, wiping down the railings. Her hair was tied back, her hands red from detergent. She didn't see me watching. For the first time, she looked small, not cruel, not triumphant, just small. I left without a word. Sometimes silence teaches better than lectures. The transformation wasn't instant, but it was steady. Johnny earned a promotion to shipping manager within 2 months. He deserved it. He worked harder than anyone else, and the staff respected him. I didn't make it easy. I never once called him son on the factory floor. He was Mr. Reyes, just like the rest. Charlotte eventually learned to polish leather properly and began suggesting small aesthetic touches, display arrangements, color coordination, even window designs. I ignored her at first, but one day Marta showed me a new layout for the storefront. "It was Charlotte's idea," she said carefully. I examined the sketches. Clean, modern, effective. "Good work," I said finally. "Tell her she can present it herself at tomorrow's meeting." When Charlotte entered the boardroom the next morning, she looked like she wanted to disappear. I sat at the head of the table, surrounded by designers and buyers. She presented her layout with shaking hands but clear words. When she finished, Pilar nodded approvingly. Luis clapped. "Well," I said after a long pause, "it appears our cleaning lady has an eye for marketing." A ripple of laughter broke the tension. Charlotte flushed but smiled, a real one, hesitant and bright. Later that afternoon, she came to my office, eyes lowered. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For not firing me." I studied her. "You've improved." "I had to," she said. "I was tired of being the villain in my own story." That struck something in me. Maybe we weren't so different after all. "Keep working," I told her. "And for God's sake, buy gloves. Those nails are a tragedy." She laughed, and I allowed myself a small smile. By autumn, Anna's shoes became a sensation across Europe. Orders poured in from Milan, Paris, and even New York. Reporters came sniffing around, curious about the mysterious American woman who had reinvented herself at 60. I gave interviews, careful and clever. My shoes are for women who've been underestimated, I told one journalist. Comfort is power. Style is survival. They lapped it up, of course. Johnny managed logistics like a pro, and Charlotte, now in charge of visual merchandising, designed the brand's first major store display in Madrid. Watching them work side by side, occasionally laughing, occasionally arguing, I felt something loosen in my chest. Pride, maybe, or the faint ache of old love reawakening. One evening, Johnny knocked on my office door after everyone had gone home. "Mom," he said softly, "can we talk?" I gestured for him to sit. He looked older, wiser perhaps. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry, not just for that night, but for all the years you carried me. I should have defended you. I see that now." I looked at him for a long time before answering. "You were a boy, Johnny. I raised you to be kind, but not to be brave. That was my mistake." He swallowed hard. "I'm trying to fix that." "I see that," I said. "And that's enough." He smiled, soft, relieved, like a man finally forgiven. When he left, I turned to the window. The billboard still glowed against the dark, but now, beneath the slogan, we'd added a second line, "Designed by women who've walked through fire." It was Pilar's idea, and I'd approved it immediately. I sipped my coffee and thought of the woman who'd once been kicked out with $200 and no home. She was gone now, replaced by someone sharper, stronger, and infinitely freer. Still, I couldn't shake one thought. Forgiveness isn't forgetting, it's moving on while they watch. And that, I decided, would be the sweetest revenge of all. It's strange how quickly success becomes ordinary. Within a year, my name was stitched inside shoes walking across catwalks in Milan and down avenues in Manhattan. "Anna," they said in accents from 3 continents, as if it were not a person but an idea, comfortable, fierce, unstoppable. I liked that. My factory hummed like a heartbeat. Orders poured in, journalists called, and buyers hovered like seagulls over bread. Marta fielded meetings like a diplomat, Pilar ran production like a queen, and Luis turned sketches into whispers of beauty. And there, in the midst of all this movement, my son and his wife worked like people who had finally learned that gratitude was not a weakness, but a form of grace. Johnny managed distribution so well that other managers began seeking his advice. He carried himself differently now, steady, confident, but never arrogant. Sometimes, when he thought no one was looking, he'd stand by the loading dock and watch the trucks roll out, a small smile on his face. I'd seen that look before on the 10-year-old who built a lemonade stand from scrap wood and refused to close shop even when it rained. Charlotte surprised me more. Her sharp edges had dulled not from defeat, but from polishing. She started helping Luis with color palettes, organizing showroom events, and eventually proposed a new collection, Roots shoes inspired by women's resilience. When she presented the concept to the board, her hands no longer shook. She'd learned to stand her ground with quiet dignity. "Your daughter-in-law has taste," Pilar admitted one evening, wiping her glasses. "And humility, a rare combination." "Yes," I said. "She learned it the hard way. The best lessons usually come with blisters." Pilar chuckled. "And your son, he's a good man, Anna. He carries your backbone." I smiled but said nothing. Pride is a delicate thing, it doesn't need to be announced, only felt. In spring, we received an invitation from Vogue Aespa to participate in their annual fashion gala. They wanted to celebrate women who had reinvented themselves. Marta handed me the envelope with a knowing grin. "You have to go," she said. "It's your story they want." I held the invitation, reading my name printed in gold. The gala would be televised, the audience full of designers and celebrities. "Let's go as a team," I said finally. "This factory is built on more than one pair of hands." That night, I called Marina back home. "Guess who's going to be on television?" I teased. "Let me guess," she said. "You or one of your shoes?" "Both," I laughed. "And tell me, how's your garden?" "Blooming," she said. "Just like you." Sometimes sisters can say the right thing without meaning to. The night of the gala, Barcelona shimmered like a sequined dress. The event was held at the National Art Museum, those marble steps glowing in the lights, photographers flashing like lightning storms. I wore a deep emerald gown that matched the courage in my veins. On my feet, naturally, a pair of my own design sleek black heels with a silver line down the back, like a scar turned into jewelry. When we arrived, the press swarmed. "Ciora Reyes, you are an inspiration," one reporter called. "What advice do you have for women who feel forgotten?" I smiled at the camera. cool as champagne. Don't wait to be remembered, I said. Remake yourself loud enough they can't forget you. The words spread faster than I expected. They printed them in magazines, quoted them online, and someone even embroidered them on a handbag. Not bad for a woman who used to clip coupons. Inside, the hall glittered with chandeliers and perfume. I saw my team looking radiant, Pilar elegant in navy silk, Luis with a bow tie slightly crooked, Marta poised as ever. Johnny wore a tailored suit that made him look every inch the man he'd become, and Charlotte, well, she stunned everyone in a simple crimson dress and a smile that wasn't rehearsed. Proud of us? She asked quietly, standing beside me. Ask me again after you've survived dessert, I said with a wink. When they called my name to the stage, I didn't trip, thank God. I stood there, lights burning bright, applause ringing like a storm, and looked out at faces both familiar and strange. For the first time in decades, I wasn't nervous. I wasn't apologizing for taking up space. 3 years ago, I began. I was a cashier in Ohio who got fired for something I didn't do. I was 60, broke, and homeless. I thought my story was over. But life has a wicked sense of humor, and sometimes it gives you a second act when you least expect it. People leaned in. I continued. I built this company for women who've been told they're too old, too late, too much. I wanted shoes that say otherwise. Because when life tries to knock you down, you don't crawl, you change your heels and keep walking. The applause that followed was thunderous. Somewhere in the front row, I saw Johnny wiping his eyes. Charlotte clapped with both hands, tears streaking her makeup. For a brief, shining moment, I forgave them, not with words, but with the peace that comes from knowing they'd finally seen me not as a burden or a mistake, but as a force. After the gala, the real twist began. A week later, I received a letter from a law firm in Madrid. Stuart's handwriting on the envelope made my heart skip. I hadn't heard from him since the showbox key that changed my life. Inside was a will apparently. He'd passed 6 months earlier. He'd left me a vineyard outside Girona and a note written in the uneven scrawl of a dying man. Anna, I couldn't fix what I broke, but maybe I can plant something that grows. This vineyard is yours. I called it Segunda Vida, second life. You've earned it. I sat there for a long time, staring at the letter. The man had been a hurricane, chaotic, destructive, and unforgettable. I didn't love him anymore, but I did understand him. He was my past, flawed, complicated, and oddly generous in his guilt. When I told Johnny about the vineyard, he offered to help manage it. You've built something incredible here, he said. Maybe I can help you grow this next dream. I agreed because I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen in years: steadiness. As for Charlotte, she wanted to design a new shoe line inspired by women in rural Spain, shoes for walking on uneven ground, she called them. I laughed. Aren't they all? She blushed but grinned. Maybe we could call them Segunda Vida to match the vineyard. Now that, I said, is an idea worth planting. By autumn, the vineyard was thriving. The hills rolled like soft green quilts, and the air smelled of earth and forgiveness. We turned one of the stone barns into a design studio, where Luis and Charlotte sketched shoes while sipping young wine. Johnny handled logistics, Marta supervised business affairs, and Pilar came on weekends to inspect quality, which mostly meant drinking and gossiping. Sometimes I'd walk the rows alone, the setting sun painting everything gold. I'd think of that night years ago, the suitcase, the $200, the silent sun, and marvel at how far life can spin you when you stop being afraid. Forgiveness still didn't come easily, but it no longer burned. Johnny and Charlotte had earned their place beside me, not by apology but by effort. And that, I realized, was all I'd ever wanted. One evening, after bottling the first batch of our vineyard wine, Johnny brought out a label he'd designed. It read, Segunda Vida, from a woman who never quit. I raised a glass. To second lives, I said. Charlotte clinked hers against mine. And to the women who make them possible. We drank, the vines whispering around us, and for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't dared to hope for: peace. Of course, peace never lasts long in my life. The following week, I received a letter from the US, from the very supermarket that had once fired me. They wanted to place a massive order for staff shoes. I nearly choked on my coffee laughing. Oh, fate, I said aloud, you do have taste. The world has a funny way of coming full circle, doesn't it? And I wasn't done yet, because while most women my age were slowing down, I'd just started walking faster. After all, my shoes could handle it. I didn't answer the supermarket's email right away. No, I let it sit in my inbox like a fine wine that needed breathing. Sometimes revenge tastes better when it's properly aged. 3 days later, I wrote back politely, of course. Dear Mr. Lawson, I appreciate your inquiry. You may recall I was once employed at your establishment. I regret that, at the time, your store's policy on false accusations did not reflect your current taste in footwear. However, Enna Shoes would be delighted to outfit your staff with one condition. The first 50 pairs must be paid for in advance, non-refundable, and personally delivered by your district manager to my office in Barcelona. I enjoy seeing old faces. It took them exactly 4 hours to agree. The day their manager arrived, carrying 2 suitcases of cash like a repentant altar boy, I almost felt sorry for him. He was new, barely 30, with a nervous smile and a handshake that smelled of cologne and panic. He didn't know the story, of course he didn't, but he did know the legend. Miss Reyes, he stammered, we're honored. Our staff will be proud to wear your designs. I smiled, slow and deliberate. They should be. Each pair comes with a warranty on integrity. He nodded, not understanding, and left relieved. Pilar, who'd watched the entire scene from the corner, laughed until she nearly spilled her coffee. You, she said, wiping her eyes, are more dangerous than a woman with secrets. Correction, I said. I'm a woman who's done keeping them. That winter, I decided to expand the Segunda Vida line, a collection of shoes that told stories of rebirth. Each pair carried the name of a woman I'd met on the way up. The nurse who'd helped me on my first flight to Spain became the Clara. Pilar's signature flat was called the Pilarina, sturdy, elegant, dependable. Even Charlotte had one, a sleek red stiletto with a hidden comfort sole called the Phoenix. When the collection launched in Paris, it sold out within days. Buyers couldn't get enough of the story, a 60-year-old American woman rising from humiliation to haute couture. The press loved a comeback, especially one with lipstick and leather. And there, under the bright Paris lights, I realized something I hadn't dared to admit before. I wasn't running from my past anymore. I was designing from it. Every scar, every betrayal, every sleepless night, they'd become the pattern beneath the polish. By the second year, the vineyard had turned profitable too. We hosted tastings for guests from all over Europe. Charlotte handled the events with grace I'd never thought her capable of. She moved through the crowd in simple dresses, laughing easily, introducing the wines like they were old friends. Sometimes, she'd catch my eye and smile, a silent truce between two women who'd fought the same war and somehow both survived. Johnny had grown into a man I respected, not just loved. He managed both the vineyard and the factory with a quiet authority that reminded me of myself at his age before the world had softened my voice and hardened my heart. He often said, "Mom, you gave me a second life too." "No, Johnny," I'd tell him. "You just finally started living the first one." And Lily, the little granddaughter I hadn't met during those dark years, was now a talkative 4-year-old with curls like dandelion fluff and a smile that could thaw a glacier. She called me Abuela Annie, and every time she ran into my arms, I felt a kind of forgiveness that no sermon or confession could ever offer. One afternoon, I took her into the design studio. She picked up a tiny scrap of gold leather and said, "This one's pretty." "It is," I agreed. "You have a good eye." She tilted her head, serious. "Can I make shoes too?" I laughed. "Darling, you can make anything." And I meant it. The years rolled on like silk over skin. The brand grew, the vineyard blossomed, and Ayana, 60 turned 63, became a name whispered with respect in rooms that once would have ignored me. But success, I've learned, is sweetest when shared and loneliest when hoarded. So I began mentoring young women designers, single mothers, immigrants, the overlooked and underestimated. We opened a small foundation in Barcelona, the Second Step Initiative. We provided training, childcare, and scholarships for women rebuilding their lives, because I told the press at the ribbon cutting, every woman deserves a second step, even if the first one broke her. The applause was nice, but the real reward was seeing those women walk through our doors heads high, eyes steady, wearing our shoes like armor. Charlotte ran the program with me. Imagine that. The same woman who once pushed me out of a home now helped other women find theirs. She'd changed, truly changed, and I found I couldn't hate her anymore. Not even a little. One evening, after a long day of interviews, she joined me on the balcony overlooking the vineyard. The air smelled of grapes and dusk. "You were right," she said quietly. I turned. "About what?" "About everything. The way I treated you. It haunts me." I don't know how you can stand to be in the same room with me. I studied her face, the fine lines at her eyes, the humility in her voice. Life had carved her into something better. Because, I said, you learned. That's all I ever wanted. People who don't learn are the only ones I can't forgive. She blinked back tears. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it right. You already are, I said softly. And if you want my advice, stop trying so hard. Live better instead. She nodded. Then she laughed, a genuine, warm sound that made me think maybe, just maybe, we'd both come full circle. In late summer, Vogue came calling again. This time, they wanted to do a feature, and Arrayas, the woman who rewrote the rules. The photo shoot took place in the vineyard, right at sunset. I wore a simple linen dress, barefoot among the vines, a glass of my own wine in hand. The photographer, a young woman with hair the color of espresso, asked, "Can you look straight into the camera, Siora? Like you're telling us something without words." I did. And what I thought was this: never underestimate a woman who has nothing left to lose. She's already rehearsed her resurrection. When the issue came out, it sold out in hours. Lily cut out my picture and taped it to the wall of her room. "That's my abuela," she told her friends proudly. "She makes shoes that make people strong." Well, I couldn't argue with that. That December, I flew back to Ohio for the first time in nearly 4 years. The old supermarket still stood there. Same fluorescent lights, same fake Christmas garlands. I walked in wearing a long camel coat and a smile sharp enough to slice fruit. The clerk behind the counter, a young man, maybe 20, looked up. "Can I help you?" "Ma'am, yes," I said. "You can tell your manager that an Arrayas stopped by. Tell him to check his staff's feet." He blinked. "Their feet?" I smiled. "You'll understand when he sees the shoes." And I left. The sound of my heels clicking down the tiled aisle, the same aisle where I'd once been humiliated. But this time, I didn't look back. Now, as I sit here on the terrace of my vineyard, the Mediterranean glittering in the distance, I can hear laughter drifting from the house. Johnny, Charlotte, and little Lily chasing the dog through the kitchen. The air smells of rosemary and roasted almonds. I'm older, yes, but lighter too. My life no longer feels like a wound that healed wrong. It feels like a scar that tells a damn good story. Sometimes women my age write to me. They say, "Anna, how did you do it? How did you start over?" And I tell them the truth. You don't start over, sweetheart. You start smarter. You turn your heartbreak into your blueprint, your regret into your fuel. You build your empire out of everything they thought would bury you. Then I sign the letter the same way every time. Keep walking. The world's not done watching you yet. Because if there's one thing I've learned, and I've learned it the hard way, it's this: the best revenge isn't success, it's peace. And peace, my dear, wears very good shoes.